Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. So the anticipation was palpable. On Saturday, January the 18th, Russ Colhart from News Nation finally released the video of a UFO crash retrieval he had been teasing. He also introduced us to a new whistleblower. The man's name is Jake Barber, a helicopter pilot and leader of a Special Forces team who Dr. Steven Greer of the Disclosure Project claims to have been advising for close to 2 years. So Steven Greer started his own podcast called the Dr. Steven Greer Podcast, and I'll show you this in just a second. He started it, he explains, in order to clarify any misinformation that might come out from any revelations that people like Jake Barber or any of his whistleblowers, informers from these black op programs that are about to reveal some information. Here he is talking now in episode 1.
The reason we're starting this podcast now, rather emergently here today, is because we have a group of people who are in the process in the next 72 hours or so who will be coming forward with a great deal of information and evidence related to the UFO and NHI or extraterrestrial issue. And I think the public is going to need to have a source of perspective and context and analysis to go to. I think without the context and interpretation, understanding, there'll be too many opportunities for the disclosure of this information to be manipulated, go sideways, and create all kinds of confusion.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead. I just wanted you guys to hear his rationale for having this podcast. He wants to make sure that the information that whistleblowers like Jake Barber comes out with, he wants to make sure that that information is not manipulated, in his own words. I'm going to skip ahead a bit here.
So there's a separate team of people, and I've checked with them. I'm okay to say what I'm about to tell you. And what I'm about to tell you is it's explosive and sensitive, as if all of this isn't. But there's a special access project, top secret special compartmented information, that's under a law enforcement entity that has been, we've been briefing the person who's been asked to direct that for about 20 months now, and also his senior operators. And these are guys who've been Green Berets of Special Forces who separated from the military now and are prepared under executive order to go forward and get the most sensitive and damaging aspects of these illegal covert operations under control here in the United States. Now, with what's coming out this week and in the subsequent weeks and months, because this is going to be a gradual release over the next few months, that urgently needs to happen. It absolutely, and this is in the executive orders for the incoming president, the current president, and the Congress.
Okay. He just goes into a lot of the rhetoric that he normally uses in all of his presentations. So I'm going to skip a bit ahead now.
This gentleman and his guys decided to unmask themselves. In other words, come forward named, which was not the original plan. The original plan was to hand over all the a lot of the evidence of these operations, the downing of the craft, the man-made ones to me, and I'd get it out. They decided to come out publicly.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. So he was alluding to the fact that the way that Jake Barber went about revealing the information wasn't the way that supposedly he and Dr. Greer had planned. Dr. Greer says that the original plan was to reveal everything all at once. Here in episode 2 of Dr. Greer's podcast, Dr. Greer actually says that he was in Jake Barber's helicopter.
And I have been out there and I've seen the facilities and I've been over the sites where they have downed. One site I was over, 1 or 2 ET craft or NHI craft a year are downed. And I was in Jake Barber's chopper with another Special Forces guy about 15 months ago over that site. So,
okay. So he specifically says that he was in Jake Barber's chopper over that site. And the site that he's referring to is a range that Jake Barber says in the Colhart interview is where they bring down extraterrestrial craft for, I assume, reverse engineering purposes. Here's Dr. Greer in episode 2 of the Dr. Greer podcast, stating that he's known Jake Barber and his teammates for approximately 20 months.
I've known this gentleman, Jake Barber, and people on his team for about 20 months, 19, 20 months now, when they first reached out.
Okay, there it is. He's stating that he's known Jake Barber and his team for 20 months. He's been working with them. And what's happening now is a slow drip disclosure. Not necessarily what maybe Dr. Greer wanted, but this is the way that I guess Jake Barber and his team are going about it. Here's Dr. Greer in episode 2 of the Dr. Greer podcast, talking about his work with the Special Forces team. And then he actually shows a clip from the Ross Colhart interview with Jake Barber on his podcast.
I've spoken for some time about a group of people who have worked at black sites out west in sensitive operations, where I have visited those sites. The leader of that team has come forward. He had a little cameo on News Nation yesterday. That would be Wednesday. That was talking about his involvement with the crash retrieval operations and what have you. There will be more that will be coming out Saturday on that same show with Ross.
So tell me about the moment when you realized that you were involved in a retrieval of non-human technology, alien tech.
So it became very clear the first time our communication process and procedure was modified. And then just visually looking at the object on the ground, you could tell that it was extraordinary and anomalous. It was not human.
Okay, so that was Jake Barber being interviewed by Ross Colhart on News Nation. And if you notice there, Jake doesn't blink. He has that odd stare. It's been often referred to as a PTSD stare on social media. And I guess if what he says is true, it's understandable that he might have that sort of look about him. And here's another clip from episode 2 of Dr. Greer talking about how he's worked with Jake Barber and his team.
As of this past summer, that individual, Jake Barber, and his team, as well as people from other sites who are working with him, we're going to just collect a lot of the evidence of the crashes, the bodies, the retrievals, the man-made craft, hand them over, and we'd put it out publicly. Then they decided to do it through some government process with an office called DOPSR, which clears things that are going to be written and released at the Pentagon.
Okay, there you go. So that's Dr. Greer's explanation as to why Jake Barber is going about things the way he is. He's working with a government agency called DOPSR, which I guess prefers a slow drip method as opposed to Dr. Greer's preferred method of just coming clean with all the information, the bodies and the craft. So I'd like to get back to Jake Barber because he's unique as far as whistleblowers go. Because while ex-intelligence officers like Lou Elizondo and David Grush have given congressional testimony, Jake Barber is the only first-hand eyewitness to become a whistleblower. In my opinion, Jake Barber seemed honest and unpretentious, and his credentials seem beyond dispute. But I have to say that the Jake Barber interview probably left many viewers more confused and skeptical than when they first sat down to watch the hour-long an overly sensationalized program. So I'm about to show the UAP retrieval video that was shown by Ross Coulthart, which is the whole point of this. But it's about as unclear and confusing as the entire interview. Okay, so just when this happened wasn't really specified in the show. And the lack of chronology throughout the show was very confusing. So News Nation shows this video taken elsewhere by another soldier. Here goes. It's not even Jake Barber's footage. It was taken at night with night vision tech, so it's not exactly crystal clear. And yes,
let's slow this down to take a closer look. That's added in 50-foot long line. We're told the craft is about 20 feet long. The egg suspended as they bring their precious cargo into land. Let's freeze frame here to look at one of the clearest images of a UAP ever taken. This is no blurry light in a distant sky. The source of the footage putting themselves at incredible risk to record this UAP retrieval. Look at how perfectly smooth the craft is. No markings at all, and no visible means of propulsion or way to see inside. Watch how it rolls, almost graceful as it hits the ground, despite being wrapped in the ropes and canvas from the cradle as it's dropped for pickup. The UAP's final destination still unknown.
Okay, so this clip has been criticized and mocked on social media as being fake, and certainly not what everyone expected. But I'd like to point out that egg-shaped UAP, at least, have been around for some time. The Lonnie Zamora case comes to mind, for instance. Here's a rendering of the craft that Lonnie Zamora reported back in 1964. He had an incident that occurred on April the 24th, 1964, near Socorro, New Mexico. He claimed that he saw two humanoid beings near a shiny egg-like craft. That's a picture of Lonnie Zamora there and a rendering of the craft. Okay, so this is a video that came out in social media right about the time that Jake Barber's video came out on the News Nation. And it shows a UAP being retrieved in Antarctica, supposedly in the year 2022. And it reads, in contrast to the recently disclosed footage from 2 days ago, the UAP in this video is of ancient origin and was discovered within a cave. Okay, so this is very similar. You can tell once I started that it's being retrieved. And you can see from the terrain that it probably is Antarctica. But this supposedly came from a cave, and it's supposedly a real extraterrestrial craft. The one that's shown in the Jake Barber interview is supposed to be a craft that was retrofitted or designed based on alien craft, but is really human-made craft. Here we go. I guess there's no sound on this here. But you can see how it's an egg-shaped craft, and it's glowing just like the one in Jake Barber's interview. Yeah, I guess that sound's not working on here. Yeah, and it's being held by some sort of a rope or lanyard there, and I'm assuming that's a helicopter. Okay, so what News Nation did was they obtained previously unseen video taken elsewhere by another soldier. It's clearly revealing what Ross says is a 20-foot long egg suspended in a cradle dangling below a helicopter. That's footage which Barber said mirrored what he saw. A perfectly smooth, unmarked craft with no visible means of propulsion or way to see inside. Dr. Greer confirms that this type of craft has been witnessed by whistleblowers working on retrieval programs in other areas. Greer also says he was informed by experts who studied such materials that the egg depicted on News Nation's video was a human-made facsimile actually built at the Lockheed Skunk Works. It was virtually indistinguishable from the NHI egg that Barber spoke about. In other words, precisely modeled on an ET Crafts technology. Whether what Barber and his team saw was NHI or of U.S. military origin would thus be impossible to say, in my opinion. Here's Greer now.
While there's a lot of controversy about that egg, and by the way, that was not his footage. Another person at a similar operation, which is corroborative, who hasn't come forward, sent that in. This is important. Some people would say it this great. I said, no, because you have multiple operators who've been in projects where they have retrieved virtually the identical type NHI craft at separate locations and times. Now, that person has not unmasked themselves.
Okay. So the fact that I showed that video before of an egg-shaped craft being retrieved in Antarctica pretty much corroborates what Dr. Greer is saying. These craft have been retrieved before in other instances. It doesn't take anything away from Jake Barber's testimony. As I said in the beginning, the chronology of the show or the interview didn't make much sense. It was all over the place. There was also a lot of talk about Jake Barber's spiritual experience that he had with not this egg-shaped object, obviously, but he talks about a octagonal-shaped, or what he calls an 8-gon-shaped craft that he retrieved. And in his own words, he said that there seemed an otherworldly quality, as if whatever he'd seen had indeed been, in his words, quote, the most beautiful spirit I've ever been possessed by, and whatever that force was, since that night, it has stayed with me. And he used the word possessed twice in telling about the, quote, extremely emotional moment as his helicopter approached what he described not something egg-shaped, but as I said before, it was an octagonal flying disc with what appeared to be 8 delineated sections. His team called these 8-gons, and more than one made its way to the ground in this particular operation. And if I recall, Jake Barber in the interview said that as you look down on it, and I guess that was his view from the helicopter, it looked as though it had 8 sides to the disc. And Jake Barber, by the way, he makes it very clear, he's very blunt about it. His sole purpose in the whole operation was to pick up and drop off the retrieved craft. He was just a transporter. He would just go from one pickup site and deliver it to a drop site location. And in this case, with the octagonal-shaped disc-shaped craft, it was about a 20-mile flying route. And as Jake Barber flew this 8-gon craft, he felt overwhelmed by, quote, an intense hybrid of sadness and happiness and beauty and song. It was late, and I'm quoting Barber, of course, here. He says, it was late and I began wondering what was wrong with me. Am I distressed, tired? I don't know. But I felt like something had tuned into me and my soul and was providing me some sense of guidance on what to do and how profound what I was doing was. So powerful was Barber's experience that he began to cry, and his voice cracked again as the recollection brought tears to his eyes as he was being interviewed by Ross Coulthart. And I quote, he said, it was a very feminine energy, I'll tell you that. And he told Ross Coulthart, quote, like a frequency that I was connected with. Then he added, quote, as crazy as it sounds, It's what's guiding me now and what's providing protection for me. It's changing my life. So he feels that whatever entity he telepathically connected with, that disc, I guess, that 8-sided disc, somehow connected with him, and he felt that it changed his life. Somehow it's guiding him and protecting him right now as he's doing these expose interviews. Okay, so the Ross Coldhart Jake Barber interview was broken up into several parts. They didn't necessarily flow into each other. This next section probably was the sketchiest. It dealt with a topic called psionics. And I'll show a clip of one of the assets that they use. Psionics is the use of telepathy to communicate with UAP. This is a picture of one of Jake Barber's team members. He's what's known as a psionic asset. And apparently they show a clip during the interview of a dogfight and what appears to be a UAP falling down as a result of Jake Barber's psionic asset's telepathic communication with one of the UAP. Here's the clip now. Okay, this is the Jake Barber psionic attempt to communicate with a UAP, or actually control a craft.
August of 2024, Jake and the Skywatcher team conducted their own operation with a psionic asset to see if they could summon a UAP themselves.
Look, there's two. Look at this, look at this, look right here. Look at this one going down and this one going up.
This footage from another Skywatcher operation showing the team's protocols. The team hoped to quietly gather evidence for Skywatcher, but instead found themselves in danger once more. And Jake says a UAP dogfight erupted in the sky above them. He believes the craft summoned by the team was warring with a rogue UAP piloted by an unknown entity attempting to intercept Skywatcher's operation.
Tell me what happened.
So we set out to do this operation. Right away when the psionic asset went into meditation, he is reporting that he is engaged and in fact piloting a craft and is bringing it in.
So he's actually telepathically controlling alien technology.
Yes, yes. As crazy as that sounds, that's exactly what we set out to do, what he reported we would do. And then things got a little weird.
Okay, I think this is where probably the majority of people watching thought it was highly improbable, not only that an psionic asset of Jake's team could telepathically control a craft, but then also be involved in a dogfight where one of the craft is brought down. So even though most people probably saw this as improbable, it's not necessarily outrageous, according to Jake Barber, who told Coldhart about, quote, a psychic component to research and development in the UAP program, end quote. Apparently, selected soldiers are being trained in a discipline known as psionics, and this term first was used in sci-fi stories from the 50s and 60s, and it meant the ability to use mental power to affect the world outside of your body. In the show itself with Coldhart, another Special Forces interviewee, Don Paul, verified that he'd met, quote, multiple psionic assets and seen them function, end quote. And according to Barber, when these people use their paranormal or psychic powers, the idea being explored is, quote, that perhaps UAP could be summoned and persuaded to land by people deployed with these abilities. And the fear here, at least in terms of what Dr. Greer is saying, is that these abilities are being used to bring craft down and take the NHI captive and the craft captive also for reverse engineering purposes. So as I said at the beginning, the interview is all over the place and it has different sections. There's a part where Jake talks about his injuries during transporting of a boxed item. He wasn't sure whether that was an actual craft or not, but according to what the immunologist Gary Nolan says, who's been seeing him, he seems to be having radiation poisoning. There's also another section on documents or tough books that contained really classified information. And apparently there was a whole trove of documents, perhaps from the recaptured hard drives. They went on a mission to get these tough books, and the hard drives were missing, and they later found them deep inside of a body of water. And these hard drives apparently were containing some very classified information. But they decided not to reveal any of that information. It was just hinted at. This is a look at one of the tough books. Dr. Greer had wanted everything to be exposed, but Jake Barber is working with the government and has decided to go piecemeal or do a slow drip disclosure. This is Dr. Greer's explanation as to how things got a bit away from what he wanted. This is from episode 2 of the Dr. Greer podcast.
So one comment about that, just so people know, I know what that team has, but I'm not in possession of it. They're in possession of it in their own OPSEC, operational security, and they're going to release it in a way that they feel is safe for all of them. And then they're going to measure the response. So that's why each time this evolves, I'm going to want to speak to all of you who are listening and try to explain what that means, and then also to counter any inadvertent misinformation that comes out.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure that Dr. Greer there is referring to the tough books or the hard drives that were actually found separately from the tough books. And it was insinuated that they probably contained sensor data from crash retrievals. He's also there justifying why he's come up with this new Dr. Greer podcast. He'll be monitoring the information that comes out from these new whistleblowers, and he wants to make sure that we all know that it's not being mixed with misinformation. In other words, he wants to clarify the information that's coming out. So it's implied that Jake Barber coming out is only the beginning. Dr. Greer had advised Barber's crew, supposedly, to go all in and release a trove of documents, perhaps some from the captured hard drives, rather than make the revelations piecemeal, the way he's doing with Ross Coulthart. But they decided to start putting their toe in the water and test the reaction. And despite Greer's longstanding involvement, his name wasn't even mentioned in the News Nation show. At any rate, there's going to be a lot more to unpack in the coming weeks. Dr. Greer will continue his podcast analysis, and talks between the principal and incoming Trump administration are expected to be ongoing as well. I am concerned, though, that whatever the truth might be revealed eventually, that the overexcited and underwhelming revelations on the Ross Coulthart interview with Jake Barber is going to mess with any future credibility that he might have. So in December, he formed this company with his team, and it's called Skywatcher. He's recruiting a larger team and coordinating with government agencies as well for a transition into what he calls a new era. And here's another post that I found on Reddit by the subreddit Above the Norm News. And apparently the News Nation whistleblower, it says here, referring to Jake Barber, was already on News Nation 3 weeks prior. He was talking about his tech company, Skywatch, in reference to the New Jersey drones. So they've already been tasked with investigating the multitudes of unexplained drone sightings along the East Coast that I had a couple of podcasts on that as well. So let's hope that the Special Forces training will serve them well, and we'll get a less over-sensationalized revelation or interview next time. This is another post from Jake Barber, the subreddit Interdimensional NHI. And Jake Barber seems to really be embracing the spiritual experience that he had with that 8-gon craft that he telepathically connected with. He's saying here in his post, "We're not alone. The sky area is not classified, and our consciousness can't be redacted. I encourage us all to look upward and look inward and to become the best versions of ourselves quickly. We need you. A new era awaits. Let's go." Okay, so in conclusion, I know that we're all hoping for some kind of monumental overnight revelation, and that's the dream. I think that this is disclosure, though. This is how it's unfolding, step by step, piece by piece, and drip by drip, whether we like it or not. The more reputable sources and mainstream media cover this, the better. It's about planting seeds of awareness and helping people adapt to the new possibilities coming our way. I think it's also about sending a message to the private aerospace companies or contractors that manage the whole UAP cover-up. In the interview, I think Jake is showing that he has a highly experienced and effective and talented team working right now to expose those in charge of the cover-up. Jake and his team already know who some of them are and how they operate. So even if his testimony doesn't convince a lot of people, it still puts pressure on the corrupt establishments, as well as putting pressure on the new administration, which hopefully is built on people interested and involved in the UAP topic. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks. Thanks for listening to my podcast.
The American people are ready to receive the truth.
Humanity is not the only intelligence in the universe.
Humanity is not the only intelligent species.
We are absolutely not alone.
Non-human intelligence exists.
UAPs are real, they're here, and they're not human. I spent 25 years as a senior official with the CIA.
I worked on highly classified UAP programs.
28 years as an astrophysicist.
I served as the 4th Director of National Intelligence.
Director of Aviation Security in the National Security Council.
A 1-star admiral after 32 years of service.
People that come forward with this, I feel like they've taken their life in their own hands.
I was recruited to a highly sensitive government program that investigated unidentified aerial phenomenon.
For over 16 years, on behalf of the U.S. government, I worked as a senior intelligence official on the unidentified aerial phenomenon topic.
We learned that the U.S. government was involved in a long-running secret war with other nations to collect and reverse engineer vehicles not made by humans.
I have seen with my own eyes non-human craft and non-human beings.
It's rotating. There's a whole fleet of them.
The first country that cracks the code on this technology will be the leader for years to come.
China has established its own version of a UAP task force.
You think for a second that they wouldn't consider using it to achieve their ends of domination?
This is similar to the Manhattan Project. This is the atomic weapon on steroids.
This is so secret, very, very few people in our entire government have been allowed access to it.
Even presidents have been operating on a need-to-know basis, but that begins to ramp out of control.
It's not acceptable to have secret parts of government that no one ever sees.
You better be careful about a government that doesn't trust its people, because there's no telling what they'll pull on you.
This is the biggest discovery in human history.
You had information being locked away that could change the trajectory for species.
It has so many beneficial impacts, including clean energy.
We should have disclosure today. We should have disclosure tomorrow. The time has come.
What else you want to know?